the new edition of the Horus Heresy on the Horus Horizon, and with all of us frothing at the mouth due to the return of our good friend Big Pauldrons, now is the perfect time to start planning your own Heresy army. Now, I've always been a little bit Heresy curious. I love the Mark 6 armor, I love the beakies, I love the time period and the lore, I love the miniatures, and now I also love the Big Pauldrons. But of course, and most importantly, this game gives us good old-fashioned Space Marine fans another excuse to paint some more or even an entire army worth of our favorite Space Marine chapters from the 41st... Wait a minute. Hello? Yes? What do you mean they're not in the Horus Heresy? Excuse me 1 second. Well, as we know, the Horus Heresy takes place in the 31st millennium, not the 41st millennium like 40k does, which means that Space Marines and the way they organize themselves are a little bit different in this setting. In Heresy, you can be one of the 9 Loyalist Space Marine legions or one of the 9 Traitor legions. Simple. And unfortunately, that means that unless your 40k army is straight up OG first founding Salamanders, White Scars, or Blood Angels, then your favorite obscure Space Marine chapter doesn't even exist yet. That means no Lamenters, no Dark Krakens, no Star Phantoms, and definitely no weird little guys from whatever nowhere edgy ice planet you made up in your head. And for some people, this is absolutely fine, and they can live their lives without painting another one of their weird little quirky Space Marine chapter that they adore, and they can happily play Heresy using some dull blue, good old-fashioned Guilliman loving Ultramarines. But unfortunately, I am not one of those people, and if you love your own 40k Space Marine chapter a little bit too much as well, then chances are you're not one of them either. So in this video, we are going to be diving into how you can make your favorite 40k Space Marine chapter work in the 30k timeline, both believably and with a little bit of style. From working with the lore, making some artwork, and even painting up the miniatures themselves using some super quick and easy methods which look totally awesome on the tabletop or in the cabinet. And to put my method to the test, I am going to try and heresy up maybe the most un-Horus Heresy Space Marine chapter to ever exist, the Rainbow Warriors. Let's go. Whoosh. Now, I do fear that some people, maybe some diehard Horus Heresy fans, are gonna hear my intro and instantly go, hey, you guys, lay off 30k. If you want to paint your weird 40k Space Marine chapters, just play 40k and leave 30k for the people who want to paint the miniatures and play the game as intended. And to that I say, I hear ya. I hear you loud and clear, but bear with me because that is not what we are doing in this video, I promise. I think the Horus Heresy time period and setting is rad, just like I think the whole of Warhammer and its setting is rad. But I do also like crafting my armies, my guys, and the stories which go alongside them to fit in with the lore in a way that's respectful to the source material and the way the setting works, as well as being creative in my own personal way. And that is exactly what I'm going to try and do in this video. And if adding a little bit of spice to a Horus Heresy army makes someone fall in love with the game and they discover they want to play it and support it at their locals and they make new friends and discover a new side of the hobby, then I say, hell yeah, that's super cool. And hey, if you're sitting there like, nah, this is too much work, I'm just gonna paint my Hawk Lords for 30k because they look cool, then guess what? That is 100% valid as well, because at the end of the day, they are your miniatures and you get to do whatever you like with them because life is too short for other people's 32mm problems. So how do you make your favorite 40k Space Marine army ready for the Horus Heresy? Well, let's take a look at a little checklist that I made earlier. Firstly, we need to think of how they're gonna fit in lore-wise, because this will sort of inform everything else that we do after. Then we need to come up with a color scheme, design plan, and then optionally some artwork for the army that reflects the lore and also suits the era. Then finally, we execute a totally sick paint job on the miniatures, which importantly can be done really fast so that we can paint a whole army of these little bad boys, but then also find a way to dirty them up a little bit more to make them more quintessentially Horus Heresy. Horus Heresy. You got it. And all of that seems super easy, right? So let's start with one of the trickier parts, the lore. So let's take a little look at the Horus Heresy time period so we can find out what kind of rules already exist for our Space Marines. During the Horus Heresy, Rabute Guilliman's beloved Legion-dividing Codex Astartes isn't around yet, so as we discussed, the approximately 1,000 Space Marine chapters which exist in 40k are basically not a thing yet. But this doesn't mean that the seeds which would eventually grow into the trees of those chapters can't already be seen in the 31st millennium. Take, for example, the Scythes of the Emperor, who, despite being a third founding Ultramarine successor chapter, can trace their roots all the way back to the Horus Heresy, where they began as a specialist task unit of sorts working within the Ultramarine Legion. And remember that even during the Heresy, Primarchs and Legions understandably recruited off-planet to fill up their ranks, meaning that individual organizations or units within the Legion could absolutely have some cultural flair to them. For example, with the Dark Krakens, they're a newer Primaris Legion, so it's already a little bit trickier, but even before they were formed, it's not out of the realm of possibility that some salamanders were still recruited from the dark water world of Nactus. So whilst they wouldn't have the iconic purple armor and squid chapter symbol, a 30k salamander recruited from Nactus could have on their Mark 6 armor a decorative war trophy from their home, such as a tentacle, a purple stripe to maybe denote that they were some kind of specialist unit, or a small item or a little bit of freehanding which could be used to hint to their culture. And all of this could absolutely be modded or even painted onto the base of a recognizable Heresy-era salamander miniature to indicate that he is a pre-Heresy Dark Kraken. Pretty cool, right? But the Rainbow Warriors, despite them being technically an Ultramarine successor chapter, are a little bit harder to fit in with the Heresy era due to their alluded-to history of maybe being heretics. Maybe. It's complicated. Okay? But since the Rainbow Warriors are an Ultramarine successor chapter, I suppose I could just make them straight up loyalist Ultramarines, but that's kind of no fun, and it doesn't really fit in with why I love my favorite chapter, which is all the mystery and intrigue and their questionable relationship with loyalty to the Emperor. So I'm going to introduce you guys to maybe the easiest and most foolproof way to sort of make your own backstory work in the Heresy era, because I am going to make my Heresy era Rainbow Warriors be Black Shields. The Black Shields in the Heresy timeline represent a group or individual Space Marines who have, for whatever reason, cut ties with their original Mother Legion. Their armor is usually a deep black, having been painted or more recently seen as sculpted over with black ceramite in order to conceal anything which would maybe allude to their original identities, including things like heraldry or even insignias. These ragtag groups of Space Marines are mysterious by nature, and under their blackened armor could be anything from shamed outcasts, lone survivors of shattered units, or even legionaries disillusioned with the Civil War tearing their Imperium apart, which makes them a very cool and sort of flexible way that you can play around with your own narratives whilst keeping it within the Horus Heresy lore. I think Black Shields are gonna be absolutely perfect for my Rainbow Warriors, who perhaps as some of the recruits from their now redacted home planet Prism started to show signs of heresy and fracture off the original unit, the ones remaining loyal to Guilliman chose to cover their original bright blue armor and colored stripes in shame, and in an attempt to keep their legion's flawless reputation pristine. After all, if even a noble son of Guilliman himself could fall to heresy, then that could potentially fracture or even splinter what little trust remained amongst the brothers of the Loyalist legions. But let's not worry about that just yet. For now, let's focus on creating some cool art for our new Heresy-era Space Marines. Editing, photo bashing, or creating custom artwork for your Heresy unit isn't exactly what I would call a necessary step, especially if you already have a pretty good vision of the kind of thing that you want to do on your miniature in the future. But I personally like to do it because it's a great way to test out your color scheme and also just have a cool bit of artwork at the end. So I'm going to be editing a pre-existing Horus Heresy profile to make it look a little bit more like my intended Mark VI Black Shield Space Marine. I start by selecting a profile which already exists that looks like it's going to be easy enough to edit by removing its chapter symbol and anything else which would make it more recognizable. Then I simply pop the profile into Photoshop, or in my case Procreate, which is like a drawing app with similar features to Photoshop but for my tablet, and then I cut the profile out fully from its page and I start selecting areas to recolor. And at this point I would obviously be crediting the artist who made the original profile, but I can't do that because Games Workshop don't credit artists yet. So if you're watching this, thank you, lovely artist who made this profile. I love it. It's beautiful. For a quick rundown on how I do these recolors, I tend to select an area that I want to recolor using the selection lasso tool, and then I usually copy and paste this part onto a new layer. And then I use levels, brightness, saturation, tint, and occasionally some color overlays to make it look how I want it to. For my Black Shield, I want to start with a clean slate, so I edit and recolor the armor to be this very dark metallic looking black, which I think looks very cool and very grimdark. But then I want to make it look like, due to some battle damage, some of the concealing black which has been painted over the top of the armor has chipped or weathered away, revealing some of the bright blue underneath and unveiling them as their true identities, the Rainbow Warriors, or I guess for now the colorful recruits from Prism. I think in the end I really like the way that this concept came out, and I'm really glad that I mocked it up first because it looks dark and spooky, and it's definitely a fun twist on my usual bright and colorful Rainbow Warrior color schemes. So now that we've sorted out the lore, we have some cool artwork, and we know what we want our miniatures to look like, it's time for arguably the best part of this whole shebang, which is to finally paint up the miniatures. But of course, since I'm going to be hypothetically painting a whole army of these guys, I want to keep it a little bit more simple than my usual spend 10 hours on one miniature method, because I fear that after 1 week I would give up and then also maybe pass out. So I'm going to show you how you can pull off this super cool and elaborate looking Black Shield effect on your own minis really, really easily. And I know a lot of people say that in painting videos, but I promise this is super simple. You're gonna love it. To start off my Black Shield Space Marine, I'm gonna paint an all over and super simple metallic black armor effect. And trust me, I've painted a lot of things in my time, and this is one of my favorite things to paint because it's so easy and it looks absolutely amazing when it's done. I simply base coat the armor pieces that I want to be metallic in a dark silver, and you can use whatever dark silver that you like, whether it's a mix of silver with a little black, or like me, just using a straight up dark silver paint. But once that's all base coated and dry, you're gonna mix a 60-40 split of Wildwood and Black Templar contrast paint, and then thin it down with either a little bit of water or some contrast medium to make an intense, rich, and slightly warm-toned black wash. Once you have your wash all mixed together, we're gonna apply it all over the dark metal in one very consistent layer. Now, this is super important because we don't want this wash to look splotchy or inconsistent, as it'll be a little trickier to clean up with its metallic base later on. So just make sure that you work your way around the miniature quickly and you try and avoid any excessive pooling or streaky marks. But don't be too worried because fortunately, when these contrast paints dry down, they tend to look very smooth and quite forgiving of mistakes. Then we are simply going to go around the miniature and apply just one single edge highlight using a very, very bright silver paint, like preferably the brightest one you have, in order to contrast against the dark metal. Now, as we know, I'm a girl that likes a dirty space marine, so as I'm applying the edge highlights, I'm also adding a lot of very fine chipping and battle damage using this paint too. I think it looks super cool and adds loads of detail to the simple paint job, but I know it's not for everyone, so you can do as much or as little battle damage and chips and scratches as you like. It's totally up to you. Once your metallic black armor is done, you could totally leave it here and your black shield space marine would look pretty much complete. In fact, look at how cool this effect looks when you paint an entire space marine using it. I swear, you guys have to try this method out. I love it so much. But yeah, in this case, I do want to hint towards my chapter's mysterious past in this paint job by adding in some weathering and battle damage, which reveals their original colors. And my favorite way to apply battle damage is with a sponge, so I'm going to use that exact method here, but instead of using the usual browns, I'm going to use my Rainbow Warrior's signature bright saturated blue color. I'm going to get a little bit of sponge from an old carrying case, dab it in my blue paint, and then use the back of my hand to remove some of the mess and make sure that the stippling pattern is pleasing to the eye. And then, just like I mapped out in my artwork, I'm going to dab the sponge on the side of the miniature to apply quite a large exposed area on his shoulder and the side of his head. Then I'm going to pop a little bit more on his arm and his leg, but only on the left hand side, as if he's been dragged or scraped in that area, revealing a bit more of the armor. Once the initial stippling was done, I went back in with my brush and some more blue and a little bit of thinned down black paint as well to define the areas a bit more until they looked kinda how I wanted to, and I was happy with the effect. Then it's time to start adding a little bit of detail to the now exposed areas under the armor, and again, this is supposed to be a super quick paint job, not at all like my usual way that I paint Rainbow Warriors, so I'm just layering up some lighter blues and adding in a couple of highlights here and there a little bit more sporadically than I usually would do, which honestly kind of suits the messier Horus Heresy painting style a little bit more, I think. Then I'm gonna pop in that quintessential Rainbow Warrior feature, which I just couldn't miss out on, which is the iconic colorful stripe on his helmet and his leg. But instead of the Rainbow Warrior chapter symbol, which would come in later, he's instead just gonna get his run-of-the-mill ultramarine symbol to denote that he was part of the Legion, because of course, the chapter hadn't been formed yet. With the armor all finished, we can move on to painting the rest of the Space Marine. Now, of course, depending on how quickly you want to get your army finished, you can go as hard or as light on the rest of the details as you like. I spent a little bit more time making the eye lenses look nice because that tends to be a focal point on the miniature, and I added a little lightning bolt to his knee as well because I think it looked cool, I don't know, but I traded those details off by doing a few super simple 3 edge highlight paint jobs on his gun, rubber undersuit, and the rest of the black elements of the armor, which saved me loads of time in the end. Now, for those who are new to the Horus Heresy, there is a little bit of a meme, which is that Heresy minis and Forge World minis in general tend to be painted a little bit dirtier than your run-of-the-mill 40k miniature would be. In fact, when I worked in Forge World, there was a bit of a running joke, which was I painted this tank or this space marine and I didn't even touch a brush, pertaining to the fact that the tank or the miniature was painted entirely using sponges, airbrushes, and other weathering techniques. Now, this isn't at all my usual style, and it makes me feel a little uncomfortable stepping outside my comfort zone, but because I want these guys to fit in, I am gonna try and channel this kind of style and try and make my miniature look a little bit more grimy. To do this, I am simply gonna base the miniature however I like, and I'm choosing an almost Martian red dusty base to contrast the blue and also tie in a little bit with the dark warm black on the armor. But then using some water, I'm gonna thin down some of the rustier reds that I used to base coat the base, and then use this to apply a messier wash to the bottom of his leg. Once this very simple effect has dried, it'll look like the dust has kicked up and settled in the recesses and kind of on the surface of the armor, giving it a very realistic looking dirty weathering effect. And with that, he is all done. But because I am a little bit extra, I've decided to add in one more surprise here to truly canonize my brand new Rainbow Warriors. So let us allow the War Master himself, Horus, to introduce this newly formed Black Shield chapter and also his favored Sons of Prism.
My brother Gilliman, so perfect in your visage, have failed. The noble Sons of Prism, who you yourself hand-selected for their beauty and skill, have seen the light. I hear even those of Prism who remained loyal to your pathetic cause are now too ashamed to wear your Legion's colors, covering themselves in hideous black to hide any association with you, their own liege, their own father. You must be ashamed. You must be frightened. For they are among you, Gilliman, and they still fight by your side. But you know that they will never truly be yours. And if your own, who you consider to be so loyal and so unbreakable, can betray you so easily, then sooner or later, my dear brother, they will all see the light.
I absolutely love how this whole project came together, especially given that the paint job was such a quick one for me especially, and painting fast is usually so far out of my comfort zone. But I think it's great how striking and versatile the whole paint scheme is, and that mixed with my new little bit of mysterious lore, which still has everything in it that I love about my 40k Rainbow Warriors, is such a great starting point for me to really get stuck in and enjoy building an army for a brand new game. And if you're a little bit heresy curious but aren't particularly enthused about just doing a carbon copy original Legion color scheme, then I highly recommend you grab a mini and try adding your own subtle creative flair to it, so that you can get excited for the game as well and really make these awesome historical Space Marine figures something that really excites you personally. But I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. As usual, thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for being rogues. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Bye-bye.
Fulfill your oaths and subscribe.